introduce our speakers today because we're anticipating and encouraging a lively discussion about a project that's getting a lot of attention, extensive media coverage, and as every bold initiative does, it's generating some angst, some misinformation, and some confusion. So we want to talk about it today. The issue is the 2-year closure of the Kentucky International Convention Center in the midst of what we all see as a booming downtown construction. Many of you have indicated through the surveys, and as a member of the Speakers Committee, I ask you to please continue using the surveys because we do read them, but you indicated that you'd like to learn more about this important topic and get the inside skinny from those directly involved. So today we're pleased to have Karen and Rip with us. Karen Williams is the president and CEO of the Louisville Convention and Visitors Bureau. You may remember she spoke to us last year about her role representing the city at industry trade shows and marketing our community as a premier venue for conventions, meetings, and leisure travelers. Rip Ripito is president and CEO of the Kentucky State Fair Board and a veteran in tourism development. In his role, Rip manages and operates 2 of the largest facilities in the state. One is the Kentucky Exposition Center at the Fairgrounds, and the other is the Kentucky International Convention Center. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Karen and Rip.
Thank you, Mary Michael.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to start off, and as Mary Michael said, you may have heard a rumor or two, so we're here to dispel or say that is exactly true. We are closing the convention center, which Rip will talk about, and you and some of you in the room, I see you may have been at other venues where we've had open discussions. We've done it with Downtown Partnership. I've done it with various media and various groups around the city the past several months. But I think what we're here today to tell you that there's not going to be tumbleweed going down the street during this time of 2016, that it's going to be good and it's going to be very successful after we open the center. There was a plan, there was a process, it was very deliberate, and I think that's what people need to know, because if you don't know there was a plan or process, you assume the worst, which I mean, when I first heard it was going to close, I was a little fearful, because one thing that you need to know before we start this process is the Louisville Convention Bureau, when I was here almost a year ago, we are 95% funded by bed tax. So I need heads and beds, and you need heads and beds to walk around to the restaurants, to go to the attractions that keeps the city lively at night. So keep that in mind. I definitely have skin in the game to build the center, but I have a stake in this to keep the rooms full. So what we're going to do, Rip's going to talk about how we got where we are. I'll talk a little bit about the process, but I think it's more important you'll glean more from the questions that you're going to ask and we're going to answer. Rip?
Thanks, Karen. So, Kentucky State Fair Board is an agency of state government. I think everybody knows that, or probably knows that. So, and as a state facility, we have a process that we go through. So, just a little bit of the history. We have an RFP process that we go through anytime within the state Commonwealth where we select architects, consultants, etc. And that process was done just over a year ago when that was started. And through that competitive process, the architects that were selected are EOP, which our Lexington Louisville architects partnered with HOK, and HOK is an international architectural firm. They've done work here, they've done work all over the country and internationally, several countries, and they're using their Chicago office, and then they've got a third architect who is a convention center specialist by the name of Don Grinberg. So that's the architectural team that is coordinating with the facilities division through Frankfurt, and that's the design consulting team that is going through the process that we've been doing now for several months. When we reached in and were able to solidify that relationship last fall and going into the winter, we began to sit down and look at the programming, and in any big project, the first thing you do is you go through the programming piece, which means, all right, we've got a program that was established by a company that came out about 2.5 to 3 years ago now, that defined what we needed to have in terms of a convention center in a downtown community that could be relevant for this day and age and still be able to be competitive. And what they determined is that we needed to have 200,000 plus square feet, contiguous square feet, so that we could have the exhibits out there that would be larger and attract more room nights and more visitors, a larger ballroom, and then the kind of space for pre-function or registration lobby areas that would be required to support that. And so that study came out, and that was the foundation of how we chose architects and went through that process. So as they began looking at that process, we began looking at what that meant. And contiguous can mean many things to many people, but contiguous by definition basically means can open up into one room in some configuration or another. So this is a contiguous space, and if that wall comes down, it becomes a larger contiguous space. So that's the idea behind this concept, and that 200,000 plus square feet is to have a large room, and what that does is it begins to attract 20 to 25% more of market share. That becomes available to us, and then that increased market share then creates opportunity. So as we looked at all of that and looked, this is not a renovation. It's not going to be putting up paint and taking care of wallpaper or maybe changing out toilets and infrastructure. It's an expansion project, not a renovation project, but it's held within a boundary where we can't grow out, over and past those two city block areas. So I think that might be one of the misconceptions, is that this is not a simple project. It's a major construction project. And so as we looked at that and what we had to do on the inside, especially when we reconfigure a ballroom, when we create exhibit space that's connected, keeping 3rd Street open, by the way, and making sure that we can do all of those things. If we didn't close the building, we would be restricted to a very small space on the west or the eastern half of the building to try and take care of the customers that we had. Majority of them wouldn't fit, number one. Secondly, we wouldn't have the support space to support them with restrooms and those kinds of things. And then as we continue to retrofit, and with the majority of the work we anticipate will be between 3rd and 4th Street, and being that major construction project in there, we would delay the project by several months, if not year, and then would, on top of that, increase the amount of expenditure exponentially. So we have a client issue, we have a safety issue, infrastructure issue, and then costs, and on top of that, the length of time that we'd be under construction. So we went through this very deliberate process beginning last fall, before the new year, and then actually began at that point determining how do we communicate that. And I'll let Karen talk more about that, but it's very important to us that we get out in front of that, especially with our clients. So I'll turn it back to you for that.
Okay, and I'm going to really just talk on the high level because I know Mary Michael said we want to get you out of here at 1. And I think it's going to be important about the Q&A. But as Rip said, it was November, December of last year when it had been discussed up to that point. But finally, as I turned to Rip and said, we have to have a decision. Are we going to close? Are we going to stay open? What's the decision? Because we have clients now. Between August of 2016, when the building closes, to August of 2018, when the new building opens, we have clients. We have to let them know. So that was our first constituents that we had to talk to, because you can well imagine, just like you're a member of Rotary and Rotary International, and all of our cohorts, the CVBs all around the United States, Nashville, Indy, all of our friendly competitors, they know we're expanding a building, and they're looking to see what we're doing, and they're preying on those clients in that time frame. So once we found out it was going to close, we got together in a room for a solid week and said, let's create options. What can we do with these 17 plus clients? And it goes back and forth, and I see some of my media friends over here that are saying, is it 17, Karen, or is it 18? But we looked at that time frame. We had 17 major citywides that had hotels downtown in the space. And we said our first option was, what can we do to keep them in that time frame? Do we self-contain them in a nice space like this? Do we move them to the Yum Center? Or do we move them out to the Expo Center where we have 1.5 million square feet, if that's available? So that was our first option. Second option was keep them, but move them to another year. saying, okay, this is what's happening. You can't do any of this first option. You can't go to the Yum Center because maybe there's space. You can't go to the Expo Center because maybe it wasn't available. But we want to retain you. Can we move you in 2018, August and beyond? I will tell you that both of those options has and will had financial implications. Because a group is not just out of the kindness of their heart going to say, yeah, Karen, I'll leave here. The Expo, I have signed this. And that's the point, that most of these groups that we're talking about signed 5, 6, 7 years ago. They're going to start promoting these conventions probably. Well, they've started now, but some of them back in 15. So we had to tie a financial implication. So then my next step was to go, we had been talking about this with our board, and Rip's on our board, to say there's financial implications. And if there was ever a time for us to spend our reserve, it's now. We need to keep the business, the heads and beds in the city, and to keep the city lively. So we created options. We went to our second constituents, which is my hoteliers, to say, my key hoteliers, to say, this is a plan. Can you offer me options? And these two things happened within a very tight week. Can you offer these options? Can you give incentives? Can we make this work? Do we have your buy-in? They said yes. Our third step was to get on a plane and visit all these 17 clients. Now, some of you are saying, you know what, and at this point, no one knew but this very close circle of the people I just said, because it was important. If any of this got out to our clients and they read about it in the paper, Nashville Indies calling them on the phone and saying, do you know Louisville's closed? And, you know, we would have lost it. So we did that. We visited all the clients. I'm happy to say, and we're still in negotiations. We call it 3 phases. Disruption phase, which that was definitely disruption, and we're still in that phase. Transformation phase, and then as we get closer to 18, relaunch phase. The clients were so appreciative of what we did. The financial implications were good for them. They were happy. We were able, now we're looking at keeping 7 of them, hopefully 9, and they're going to stay in the city during that time frame. And the others, we're looking at different dates for them, 19 and beyond. We only lost 2 of those. And then we lost 2 of those because of their bylaws and their statutes and their policy. They couldn't look at other years. But I feel certain we'll get them back, because we said when you come back, we'll offer you a financial implication for that. We also, during this time, we were meeting with our board and a national firm to come in and do a business plan on just specifically that time frame. Planning for Louisville's Enhanced Destination Experience is a business plan we have internally that lives on our website that any of you can go to. It's www.gotolouisville.com. That is a business plan that each of us are working to keep business in that city. And I think the other misnomer is when you know, and I really hesitated to say that 17 and 7 and 9 because in the beginning it was important, but people were really hanging on those numbers. But that's not all the business that's in the city. You have the Expo Center that has 1.5 million square feet. There are 10 groups that meet annually that are major citywide. Some of you know, Farm Machinery, Green Industry Expo, IQ. I mean, that they meet here every single year that fill this entire city. There's corporate business. There's a lot of business, and I appreciate what Carl said, because we've reached out to Carl and Greg and Troy and his team. We're going to do some very non-traditional business during this time frame, but we will have heads and beds during this time frame.
You know, one thing that might be of clarification is a relationship that we have as organizations, and as we are the Fair Board and are an old organization and have all of the facilities, and we control a calendar. What Karen and the CVB does is market Louisville and the Louisville area as a destination, which includes selling us as part of that, because when we interpret a package and present a package to a potential customer, they're looking at, you know, is the city going to meet my needs? And it's going to include the facilities, it's going to include hotels, it's going to include entertainment and restaurants, it's going to include transportation, airlift, all of these things. And so their role is, and why they're funded by that tax, is so that they can go and sell us as a destination, and we give them priority for long-term bookings, because many of the relationships that we have with our large conventions begin 8 and 10 years in advance of when their show actually happens in one of our facilities. And conversely, we build long-term relationships. We've got some shows on the books another 10 years out from right now. And actually, internally, since we own the fair and the North American International Livestock Expo and Farm Machinery Show, we've got those on the books till 2030. And that's so that we can be sure we're taking care of those priorities. And then we work constantly to do what we call in the year, for the year types of business. But our relationship is very much hand in glove, and that's why we present together, that's why we sell together, and we are very connected in the mission of driving economic impact for the Commonwealth and specifically here for Louisville. And so if anybody asks what business we're in, it's in economic development.
Might be a good time for questions now, then we can.
Glenn Stuckel. I'm a Metro councilman. And
Yes, sir.
Rip, I've been getting a lot of calls about the deplorable state of the fairgrounds. And I think it's pretty important that facility is going to have to stand in for the convention center. What's your take on that? Is it funding? What seems to be the problem out there?
Yeah, it's funding related. And so to your point, one of the things that has to happen with facilities, and I've been here just over 2 years, and as we've gone through and looked at what needs to happen, the infrastructure is something that's critical for us. And we're taking care of that base level first and working our way up. But to your point, we have several items that we need to take care of out there, everything from a new boiler that needs to be put in the building that we're working to design and implement now, to taking care of cleaning up the parking structures and meeting the booths and the gates and taking care of those. And then internally, as we look at repairs, we're in the middle of a sewer project, for instance, where we take care of that. So we're working on the infrastructure. A lot of it is cosmetic, and unfortunately, it's derived specifically from a funding point of view.
Thank you.
You bet.
Bill Schneider. I've worked in downtown Louisville for more than 20 years and get out on the streets and walk a lot. You mentioned 3rd Street's going to stay open. Is anything going to be done to make that tunnel area more attractive, lighter, feeling more safe? I walked through there the other afternoon, and it's just really kind of a scary place to be in. Is that part of the expansion project?
It's part of the overall evaluation of the entire project, yes. And so we're looking at not only from that area, but all the way from 2nd to 4th Street, and that includes under that area. It needs to have some lighting retrofit, and we're waiting to see what the architects can come back with, if that includes anything that can help us under there, or if that's something that we have to address specifically as an agency. And so once we get past this pre-design phase and understand that better, then we're going to be able to implement that. We see it as an opportunity for branding, for potential sponsorship, for a way of identifying us and as a community, not just us, the Fair Board, but as a community for the times when we have all our guests here from out of town, whether they're here going to the Yum Center for a game or a concert, or whether it's a convention. It's a major traffic area, pedestrian area that will actually grow, because once the Omni comes on, that'll be another pathway that the guests at the Omni will be staying in. So we've asked the architects to look at that and make recommendations. How it fits into the scope of the project, we don't know yet. We're just not there. And I don't know what it would look like, or if there'd be any major physical modifications. I don't have any idea yet. But to your point, we know that we need to improve lighting, and it needs a good cleaning more often than probably people realized because of the exhaust that come in there. It's also one of our major dock areas where we load into the facility for the western half of the building. All of the trucks and deliveries come in that area. And so it's a challenging area. It's a world of opportunities for us.
Hi, Harriet Friedlander. You've done a great job planning for our guests for those 2 years, but I'm somewhat concerned about the small businesses that really thrive on the convention and on the conventions and the visitors downtown. They're not deep pocket companies, and they really need that day-to-day traffic. Have you been in discussions with them? And if so, do we have any plans to work with them?
We have, and I think that's really probably the number one group that has had the concerns, and understandably so. I guess when I think of conventions and I say heads and beds, I think of those 10,000, 15,000, whomever, what size group that is. When they're through with their meetings, they're the ones walking around downtown and eating in the restaurants, going to attractions and going to shops. So that is our goal, because that's important. We know there's a lot of small businesses, and all these opportunities that Rip and I have had the chance to talk, the most concerned have been people like yourself, restaurants and small shops. Where are those people going to go? So that's what we've been doing. That is our concern, because if people are staying in hotels, it's our thought, just by the history that we have, that they're going to be able to go out and eat in the restaurants and the attractions. When I said untraditional business earlier, we're doing a lot with the sports. I'm reaching out to the arts. I saw David here earlier. I mean, that's things we should be doing, but you know, when you're trying to build a convention center, once we get past 18, we're looking at the masses, the 18, and you know, the 20,000, 30,000. But during this time, we're going to do some clever, very clever arts and cultural packages that you're going to hear about in the next 6 months. It's going to be specific. That's people on weekends. That's sometimes you don't see that weekend business down here because of the way the conventions. So you're going to see those things, and it's my hope that once we do that for this 2 years, then we're going to have this great reputation in this 300-mile radius that we have this cool arts and culture weekend. So we are definitely thinking about that.
Karen and Rip, I think we all know no pain, no gain, and unfortunately this is part of the process we have to go through. But talk to us a little bit about what we can expect in 18, and how much more attractive does this make Louisville than some of our competitors like Indy and Cincy and Nashville you mentioned earlier?
Well, I'll talk about the rooms, and then I'll turn over to Rip. And thank you, Mary Michael. That was really the intention. When I came on board last March, our first 12 weeks we were in Frankfurt, or March a year ago, to say, let's build this convention center. Because if we don't, we are not going to be able to keep up, and we're already behind with the Indy and the Nashvilles, the St. Louis, all of our competitive set. But the building that Rip's going to talk about, it's going to allow us to book 20 to 25% new business. That's huge for us. That 20 to 25%, it's the perfect storm in Louisville. We're having anywhere from 1,500 to 1,700 new rooms, depending on what you pick up and hear about a new hotel, but at least definite in the ground planned hotel rooms during that time. The Omni's going to open in March of 2018. The center opens in August of 18. The perfect storm. So you're going to see, in addition, new business downtown that this city's never seen, and it's because of the type of hotel product. You're going to see more 4-star hotels than we've ever had in this city. And the groups that want that, we've not had that amount of rooms for them before. We've not had that package. So you see a lot of youth, you see a lot of education. They want a lower ADR, average daily rate. But when you have the Omni, you see the Galt House going through innovation, you have the Marriott, you have the new Embassy Suites, you have the Loft Hotel. This is going to be higher rated business past 2018 in convention centers. That's perfect news to the restaurants here. So, I mean, the future is so bright for us, and that's what I always want us to focus on. Let's think about 18, and while we're keeping 16 to 18, we're booking new business. We have a whole team that's focused on 18 and on. When that building opens, we need to have business there.
And so we are constantly doing research and are looking at information that comes from sources such as the Center for Exhibition and Industry Research. And the number one comment on show producers' surveys nationally is that technology has to drive the facility and the infrastructure that supports that technology, and then the ability for the wayfinding and all of that combined. And the advancement of technology, when it really came strong 15 years ago, people began to worry about virtual trade shows and that there'd be no need for a face-to-face meeting any longer. And that's been far from the truth. Of the last couple of years, you can see from publications like Trade Show Week, which has its own research wing, and SEER, which I just mentioned, the Center of Exhibition Industry, I talked about how we've had moderate growth. It's been around an average of 3%, and it has outpaced most of GDP on most quarters. But what we look at on all of that is what are the needs of the people who are going to use the building. And the study that we had that was done 3 years ago now indicated that if we did nothing because of those kinds of issues, we were going to begin losing 10% of the business downtown annually, which would mean 10% of the visitors, 10% of the economic impact, 10% of the taxes that are derived. And so we knew that that wasn't a tenable situation. We have to figure out what we do to be relevant for the 21st century. And meeting planners know that we have a facility that is a little harder to work in than some of our competitors right now. In fact, it's a lot harder in some cases. And so we have to have that contiguous space. We have to have the pre-function area. And we get that in surveys. We see it through industry research. And so there again, it's a little bit like what you're saying, pay me now, pay me later in a way. But if we don't pay attention to what we're doing to drive economic impact long term for the community, then we're being a little short-sighted in that regard. And so we're using this information, using the metrics, taking care of what we hear from the surveys and from our clients, driving technology. The technology in this facility will be upgraded immensely over what it is right now. And so as we look at all of those aspects, we're going to create a facility that's going to be able to be marketable and be competitive against a larger number of the set that we're out against now with Indy and Nashville and others that are around us.
Any other questions? Well, when I was here last time, I showed you a short video, a leisure video, and so I have to show you one of our newest leisure videos that I think is great fun. And it just goes without saying in closing, Karen Williams, www.gotolouisville.com, K. Williams, please call me. If you have someone or know a small business or know anyone that has a concern, I'm on the trail right now, so please have them call me, and I'm happy to sit down with them and discuss all this and more. So,
Same here. Thank you very much.
we'll show the video. Thank you.
When this kid was 12, his bike was stolen. He learned to box with gloves like these. He floated like a butterfly and stung like a bee. Once he said, "If you ever dream of beating me, you'd better wake up and apologize." He was a champion in the ring, but his championship beyond the ring was what made him the greatest. He was so great, his hometown named a street, hung a huge poster the size of a building, and contributed to the center honoring his life and legacy. His hometown is here, Louisville. Louisville also has these museums: 21C Museum, Fraser History Museum, Kentucky Center for the Performing Arts, Kentucky Science Center, and the Louisville Slugger Museum and Factory. Approximately this many home runs have been hit by the Louisville Slugger bat. All these museums, all conveniently on Main Street, are part of Museum Row. This is Whiskey Row, also on Main Street. Whiskey Row was home to bourbon distillers in the late 19th century and is now home to the Evan Williams Bourbon Experience, the first distillery on Whiskey Row since Prohibition. Whiskey Row houses dozens of restaurants and bars where bourbon flows like water. All bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon. These are fine Kentucky bourbons. This is a foreign whiskey. If you need a passport, you can get one on the Urban Bourbon Trail. This guy, this girl, that older guy, those people, and this lady drink bourbon. But they don't just drink bourbon in Louisville. They eat it too. We put bourbon in our chocolate, in our grits, and on our steaks. Try pairing that yumminess with some of our local brews too. Beers brewed by guys with beards. Speaking of beards, the James Beard Foundation presents awards to the most talented chefs in the culinary game. All of these Louisville chefs have been in the running for one: Ed Lee, Anthony Lamas, and Kathy Carey. Among Louisville's culinary wonders, Benedictine is a local tradition. The cafe serves it on wheat with cucumbers, bacon, and lettuce, but it is best accompanied with another Kentucky signature, the mint julep. The mint julep is the official drink of the most exciting 2 minutes in sports, the Kentucky Derby. The Kentucky Derby is so popular, they have a museum too. But it's more about the horses than the drink. But man, does that drink sound good. Know what else sounds good? My Morning Jacket. Before they were selling out mega shows here, and all over here, they started selling out shows from their hometown, here, and then here. We ain't just bluegrass and bourbon, but there's a festival for that. There's also the Humana Festival of New American Plays, the Kentucky Derby Festival, Abbey Road on the River, Lebowski Fest, and the Forecastle Festival for Music, Art, and Activism. From the summer concert series at Rye, to interactive installations at the local Speed, to the nightly ping pong exercises at Garage Bar, we're all about keeping it weird. Louisville is within a day's drive of half the nation's population. All you have to do is this. Once you get to the city, these pedals will take you across town to have a drink. Want even more of the great outdoors? These pedals will take you 100 plus miles around the city through Cherokee, Seneca, Iroquois, and Shawnee parks, all designed by Frederick L. Olmsted, the same guy that designed this park. That's not your kind of park? What about a 63-acre park that includes 50-plus coaster, family thrill, and wave rides called Kentucky Kingdom? Woohoo! Good ride! High five! That was created here. So was Happy Birthday, the Cheeseburger, and Moonshine University. Louisville has it all in one great place. Home to the greatest and all things that are great. Louisville.
That is fun.